Hey everybody, welcome to Haw River Digital Camp. Thanks for joining us. My name's Cameron.
My name's Lucas.
Today we're going to be learning a little bit about reptiles, so let's hop in and see what we can find out.
Okay, so today we're going to be learning a little bit more about reptiles. Animals that usually fall in that category that we think of are snakes, lizards, alligators, turtles, caiman, things like that. Before we go down our list of characteristics, just think in your mind about your favorite reptile that you've ever saw. Maybe you saw it on the internet, maybe you saw it on TV or at a zoo, or maybe it's your pet reptile, and think about why you like it so much. Maybe it's the color of it, where it lives, how big it is, what it eats, and maybe it's just your favorite because it's your pet. But just keep those in your mind, and then as we go through our list of things, see if it matches up with what you're thinking of. To start off, reptile just comes from a Latin word that means creeping animal. When we think of reptiles, the animals are really low to the ground, so turtles, snakes, even the really big alligators are really low to the ground whenever they walk. And a lot of times they move pretty slow. Once a reptile gets warmed up, it can move very fast, but a lot of times when we see them, they're not really moving that fast. So that's why they got the word creeping animal in their name. Next, they're vertebrates. So if you take your hand and you feel the back of your neck, you can feel little bumps, which is our bones. That's going to be our vertebra, our spine. So just like reptiles, we have a spine. That's how we get around, that's how we move. There are animals called invertebrates, and those are usually like insects or things like that. A lot of times they'll have a hard exoskeleton and no spine. And they use that hard exoskeleton with muscles attached to it to move around. But snakes, they have to have a spine. Reptiles also breathe air. So if you think about sea turtles, or even the turtles we have here in our lake, we think about them being underwater for a very long time. A lot of times we think that maybe they're breathing under there, but they have to come up and breathe air. So no matter how long they stay underwater, they have to come up at some point to get air because they don't have gills. They're not equipped to live underwater. They're also ectothermic. That's just a fancy word for being cold-blooded. They have to have external factors come into play to heat them up. We're endothermic, so our body is regulating itself from the inside. If we get really hot, we sweat. If we get cold, we shiver, and that's how we regulate our body temperature. But reptiles, they need an external factor, which most of the time is going to be the sun. If you have a pet reptile, you have heat lamps, and you also have a heat rock they can lay on. But out in the wild, they don't have those, so they're just going to rely on the sun and some heated up rocks that the sun heated up for them. Reptiles also have scales or scutes. If we think of snakes and lizards, we think of their scales, and their scales don't grow with them. If we see our skin here, it's really stretchy. This grows with us as we grow. But if we think of snakes, especially, their skin does not stretch with them, and they have to shed their skin. So I actually have in here one of our friends that we're going to meet in a little bit shed his skin a few days ago, and we set it here, and you can see from the head all the way down to his tail is in one intact piece. And you can actually even see his eyes here, and they actually have scales over their eyes. So whenever they shed, that scale also comes off, and there'll be a new scale underneath. When this is first shed, it's kind of wet, and whenever it dries, it shrinks about 25%. So our friend that we're gonna meet in a little bit is actually 25% bigger than this snake shed. Reptiles like turtles and alligators have scutes, and that's just a different adaptation. Turtles have them on their shells, alligators are gonna have them on their back. They're really, really thick. They shed them sometimes, but not in the same way that these snakes will. Many reptiles will lay eggs. Some reptiles do live birth, and some do a hybrid. So the eggs will be in their body, they hatch in their body, and then they do live birth. And that's just an adaptation to keep the eggs safe, because one risk that oviparous snakes, which are egg-laying snakes, have is once they lay those eggs, another animal could come and eat the eggs while they're not there, and then they're gonna lose their whole breeding season. Whereas if you have the eggs in your body and you carry them around with you, once they hatch in your body, you lay them out that way. It's just another extra step to keep them safe. And like I said, not all reptiles will do that. Each reptile will have their own way one of those 3 ways. So in just a minute, we are going to take out our friends from our containers here that we brought with us. We'll get some up-close shots of them, that way we can see them really well from home, and we'll talk about some characteristics they have that maybe other reptiles won't have. Okay, so we have our first friend out for you to see, and his name is Weasley. Let me see if I can get him to twist around here. So Weasley is a corn snake, and he got his name because as you can see, his pattern is kind of reddish. His owner really likes Harry Potter, and her favorite red-haired character is Ronald Weasley, and even his pillowcase is Gryffindor, so he really fits to his name pretty well. Weasley has a natural color pattern, and what that means is if I were out here looking for a wild corn snake, I could find one that looks just like him. There are other snakes, like the one we have in this tank here, who's a little bit different. Their colors are bred to be that way, so you won't find them that way in the wild. We got Weasley at a reputable snake breeder, and that's important because there's a lot of snake breeders that don't take good care of their snakes, or they do some not really humane ways or ethical ways of raising their snakes to make money. So we made sure we found one that had a good reputation. That way the snakes that we got would be healthy and happy. Captive bred snakes are also really calm and docile a lot of the times. We've had Weasley since he was a baby, so he's used to being handled like this. He's used to being put in this pillowcase and then shown off to the kids, or anyone really. So that's why he's so calm. If I were to find a wild corn snake and pick it up, it would be more likely to bite at you. It would try to get away first, but they're not gonna act just like this. So if you're outside and you see a snake, you really don't want to play with it alone. Make sure there's an adult there. But if you and the adult are not 100% sure what the snake is, neither of you should touch it, even if there is an adult there. And that's because some snakes are venomous. Weasley is not venomous, so even if he were to bite me, which he's never struck at any of us, it wouldn't hurt me if he actually did. But that's one major difference between captive and wild snakes. Weasley is gonna be eating little frozen mice that we thaw out. He doesn't have to hunt, we just give him food. He eats and then we show him off. So he does have to work for his food a little bit, but it's nothing like out in the wild. If it was a wild snake, the corn snakes would be looking for mice or little birds, things like that to eat. And how they capture and take down their prey, they'll strike at it, bite it, and then wrap around it and squeeze. Every time the mouse or the bird would breathe out, the corn snake would squeeze a little bit tighter, and eventually the animal wouldn't be able to take a breath again, and it would suffocate. There are snakes that have special adaptations. They have fangs with venom, and venom is just from specialized salivary glands. So it's their spit glands, basically, that are changed to produce venom. Venom is what hurts you if it gets injected into you. Eating venom technically wouldn't hurt you unless you had an ulcer in your stomach. Poison is what hurts you if you eat it. But snakes have venom, which means they inject it into your bloodstream. But Weasley doesn't have that, he's just a constrictor. Let's see if I can get him to get off here a little bit. Snakes, I'm not sure if you can see in the video, his little tail, his tongue flicking. So snakes flick their tongue a lot, and they have what's called a Jacobson's organ in the roof of their mouth. This organ is going to pick up scent particles. It flicks its forked tongue, which means it has a tongue with two sides that can kind of move separately. It'll flick it out in the air, bring the tongue back in its mouth, and touch that Jacobson's organ, and it tells the snake what is around. If it's hunting, that's very helpful for the snake because it tells the snake which side the scent was coming from. And you can see Weasley's wrapping around here. Snakes like to wrap around you to make sure they don't fall. So if you're ever holding a snake and it starts wrapping around you, it's not trying to eat you or hurt you. They just don't have arms or legs, so they can't hold on. So they wrap around with their lower half, and that keeps them stable on you without falling off. these are found in the Piedmont. They're found through North Carolina, but they're a snake that you're probably not ever gonna see just by walking around. They're kind of reclusive. They like to hide inside dead trees and things like that. So they're not gonna be that active just crawling around like maybe your black rat snakes that we see everywhere. And this is a good time, if you can see under his belly, you can see that color pattern there. That's gonna be one reason why the corn snakes have their name. It kind of looks like corn kernels that you see on the corn that we get around October, the Indian corn. And they were also found whenever people would store their corn snakes would inhabit that area a lot, looking for the mice that was trying to eat that corn. So that's just another reason that they have that name. And I'll pull out this skin one more time for you. Here we go. And we can show them side by side. So this is the snake that actually left this skin. And before he shed, you can tell they're about to shed because they get kind of dull with their color pattern and their eyes gloss over. So we mentioned earlier that you could see a scale on the eyes here. Weasley doesn't have eyelids, and whenever he needs to shed, his scale on his eye gets really cloudy and you can't see. So we don't mess with him until he sheds once his eye gets cloudy. And that's just because he can't see very well, so he may not know that it's us reaching in for him and he might get scared and strike. So we just leave him alone during that time and let him shed his own way. They also lay eggs. So Weasley is gonna be oviparous, which means, well, Weasley's a boy, so he can't lay eggs. But Bendy, our female, is oviparous. So if she laid eggs, she would just lay them and leave. She's not gonna do live birth. She's not gonna have eggs in her stomach and then hatch that way. They just lay the eggs and leave. And most reptiles aren't gonna take care of their eggs. Snakes don't take care of them once they lay them. You can see videos of alligators or crocodiles that do protect their eggs, but they're a little bit different. Each reptile is gonna have their own way of handling that. If we get you some nice shots of him while he's out. And just remember, one more time, if you're outside and you see a wild snake, you need to be 100% sure what that snake is. And another reason that's important, if it's a small snake or a juvenile snake, they can look way different than adult snakes. So you may think that it's something that's safe when in reality you're picking up a venomous snake. But even those snakes, they're not gonna chase you down, they're not gonna try to bite you. Venom is expensive, which means it takes a lot of energy for those snakes to make. So they're not going to be just biting everything because they feel like it. And it takes a while to replenish that venom. So if they just bite everything, if something actually came at them to hurt them, they wouldn't have venom to use to defend themselves, and they wouldn't have venom to slow down their prey and kill it that way. All right. One last look at them. And we will show you our next friend as soon as I get Weasley back in his bag. All right, so we have our second friend here. Her name is Bendy, and she got her name from Bendy Irwin, which is Steve Irwin's daughter. And some of you at home may be thinking to yourself, why is he pulling snakes out of pillowcases and coolers? That's just a temporary travel case. We're taking them from their tanks down to a different room where we can film with them. And instead of just holding them in my hands all the time where I could drop them or where they could get away, we just stick them in this safe pillowcase and stick them in here, and that kind of regulates their temperature and just keeps them safe. And snakes are escape artists, so they can get out of things really easily if you're not really sure that it's sealed up. So putting them in a pillowcase and in a cooler makes sure that they're gonna stay where they need to be and they won't get out. Because if these corn snakes were to get out in the wild, they have an extremely low chance of surviving because they are used to getting their thawed mice delivered to them on a platter. And when I say platter, I mean a literal platter. they get delivered on these. And that just doesn't happen in the wild. So we want to make sure they don't get out, which is why we have them in these. So you're going to notice something about Bendy immediately, and that is how different she looks from Weasley. Okay? Weasley has a different color pattern. She is not a native color pattern. And you can see how she's striped here, and then it kind of breaks up through here. Okay? And the way that snake breeders do this, it's going to take multiple generations of snakes to do that, which means they're going to breed, pick certain colors out of that batch, and then breed again, of course from a different batch, but they're going to get different colors that they want and breed them together and hope that they get something that looks different. So you wouldn't see a corn snake like this out in the wild. She eats the same things that Weasley does. She acts the same way. We got Bendy as a baby as well, so she's really, really used to being handled. And then even on her bottom here, her bottom side, looks different than Weasley's did. And you can see it's kind of hard for me to get her tail up so I can show, because she keeps wrapping her tail around my fingers. And that's just basically her safety net to keep her from falling. So if she were to slip, she would have that tail wrapped around me and she wouldn't get hurt. Alright. But you wouldn't see these out in the wild. So it's kind of cool just to see all the different color patterns that you can have. With our captive bred snakes, we keep them in a 20-gallon tank, and then once they get bigger, you can always move the tank size up. But if you had a wild snake and you caught it and you wanted to keep it, there are several things that would hinder that from happening. So first of all, you shouldn't take the snakes out of their habitat because they serve an important purpose. You could be taking that snake out of there and keeping it from breeding. Second, wild snakes, or even wild reptiles, have parasites and diseases that Bendy and Weasley would not have. And the way that they escape those, if they have a parasite and they poop, they can just slither away from that. Whereas if you catch a snake out in the wild, you put it in your tank, it's gonna poop, and that stuff, parasites and things like that, are just gonna build and build, and it won't be able to escape, and it'll die that way. Most people that get wild caught snakes, their snakes won't live past a year or so. Whereas Weasley can live close to 20 years or more, and Bendy and Weasley, they can live 20 years or more, as long as they're taken well care of. And we plan on having them for quite a long time, and that's one reason if I go out and I catch a wild snake, I'm very up to date on my snakes. I'm knowledgeable of what snakes are venomous and non-venomous and which ones to hold and how to hold them. So I pick them up sometimes, mostly for educational purposes. But if I were to do that during the day, I can come over here and pick up Weasley after, because something could be on my hands or under my nails, and it could get on Bendy or Weasley and make them sick. Alright, so we'll get one last look at Bendy. And while you're looking at him, for the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go on a reptile hunt, which just means we're going to show off some different places that reptiles can be found. We're going to show you a bunch of different areas. We'll try to find some. We may get really lucky and find some. Maybe we'll just get a video of one. But if we do come up on one, we can go up close and see what it is. We'll show you all the different habitats that you can find different reptiles here in the Piedmont. And maybe you know of some at home that you saw reptiles at. Maybe you know some secret spots. We're just going to show you around the park, show you some places that we've saw snakes or other reptiles before. Just have a fun adventure. So we'll see you in a minute.
We were out looking around for some reptiles and we found this right here. I think it's pretty cool. It's the eastern fence lizard. If you take a look at it, it has a coloration of dark and light gray and some tan. This right here is a female eastern fence lizard. You can tell by how it doesn't have blue or green on it. The males have blue and green on its side and its chin to help attract females during mating season. Its habitat is among rock piles on forest edges, and you can find them on buildings around the forest. So they are very versatile in their habitat. It's an insectivore, so that means that it only eats insects, quite small insects, and it can eats a variety of insects. If you take a look right here at its tail, the tail is special because it has a defense mechanism. When it's attacked, it can sever its tail off and use it as a distraction for the predators. It'll flop around all over the place, and while it gives it a chance to run away, and its tail will grow back. Just like snakes, it shed, but unlike snakes, it sheds off in pieces rather than one long piece of shed. If you take a closer look at the claws of it, it has these little sharp claws that help it attach to like the side of trees or rocks or a building, where like this one where we found it on the side of a building. Just like snakes, it's cold-blooded, so when its body temperature gets too cool, it'll go out and find a large flat rock that's sitting in the sun to just lay out on the rock to gather up some heat inside of it. That's called basking. And when it has had enough, it'll go off into the shade, maybe under the rock, to cool off. So this is a very cool thing, and we're about to go on a reptile hike, so we'll go and put this guy back where we found him. So this right here on the side of buildings is a good place to find lizards and other reptiles. It has a rough texture on the side of the building, so the claws have good traction. So earlier today we actually found this lizard right up here on the wall. And at the time, the sun was beating right down on the wall, so it's a really good place to bask for lizards. And if you take a look along here, you can see cracks and little crevices where the lizard might be able to hide from predators or to cool off from being in the sun. We almost lost him in a couple of these areas, but we were able to catch him. So we're gonna put him back because he is a wild animal. We don't want to keep him. So I'm going to pull him out of here, if I can figure this thing out. Put this down, and let's grab her right here. We're gonna put her right back where we found her, so she can go and bask and live for the rest of her life. So now that we've let our lizard go, we're gonna go on a small hike to find different places where you might be able to find some more lizards or other reptiles.
All right, so we're here at one of our first stops, and we have a snake board. These are things that we put out in the woods to attract reptiles, and they're really good spots for them to hide just because it's a flat surface for them to get under. There's space under it. It stays really cool here because it's in the shade. These are usually made out of wood, and that's because if this were in the sun, it would get so hot it would bake anything that's under it. So if it was wood, you could leave it out in the sun and other reptiles could still live under it. It keeps moisture a lot longer underneath it, so it doesn't dry out as fast. So you can find snakes, lizards, and often amphibians. So you can find salamanders and frogs and things like that. We're gonna take a peek and see what we can find. If you have one of these or you see a board that you wanna flip, it's really important to use a snake hook. And that's just gonna keep your hands away from the corners because I don't know what's under here. There may be nothing, or there may be a snake. I'm not sure yet. But me taking this snake hook, putting it here, it doesn't matter if that gets bit. And as you can see, I am back on this side, and I'm gonna be pulling it up. So this snake board is gonna be facing that way. So if there is a snake under here and it wants to run out really fast or strike, it's gonna strike away from me. Whereas if I open it on this side, he would only be able to come at me. So we'll just take a second, see what's under here, and I'll pull it up, grab it this way. Right now, we just have a lot of ants. Under this specific board, we found brown snakes, salamanders, things like that. Not every snake board is gonna have a reptile under it every time, especially if you lift it up a lot. But if you leave it sitting for a while, especially after rain or something like that, there are reptiles and amphibians and things like that that like to hide under these. So let's go to another spot and see what else we can find. Okay, so here we have an old storage building, and this is actually a really great place to find black rat snakes. The reason that you can find them here, they really like being near buildings, and that's because mice like to stay in buildings. So small rodents and things like that like to make nests near the buildings, and that's one of the rat snake's main sources of food. So you can find them near people a lot. I think most of the black rat snakes I have found have been right near the buildings that I live in or I work in. I found some out in the woods and stuff, but really around the buildings is where you're going to find a bunch of them. And we have a great example of a food source. So if you can see, in this old cart, there's actually a bird nest. And bird eggs and baby birds are a really big part of a black rat snake's food source. So there used to be eggs in there earlier this summer, and I never saw any baby birds come out of there, and the mom stopped showing up. So I think what happened is a black rat snake came up and got the eggs to eat them. But places like this are great places to find snakes if that's what you're looking for. You can also, if you're looking for other kinds, look under logs and things like that. But for black rat snakes, this is a perfect habitat. We've also found a bunch of black rat snakes inside the building. It's just so dark in there we can't show that off to you. But places like this are great. We'll go to a couple more spots and see what we can find. Maybe we'll come across an actual reptile, but if not, we'll show you at least a few more places we might could find other things. Alright, so here we're at a little bridge, and as you can see there's a bunch of rocks right here. We also have a nice water source coming under. There's a little lake up there, and then it kind of opens out here and goes into our wetlands. This is a really great place to find water snakes. You can also find other reptiles under the rocks and things like that. Salamanders again will be here because it's really moist and they can get their skin wet that way. But water snakes are going to be here because there's a great food source. Mammals are going to be coming here to get water so they can eat those. If fish get washed down, they can eat those. But you can also see in these rocks, there's little cracks and caves. So that's really good places for the snake to hide. And that way if I were to walk by or if I were a predator, it could see me and then just duck under the rocks really fast. So they'd be really hard to get. And under here you can see the water source where it's trickling down. The water snakes can cool off in there, get water, and then once they want to warm up, just lay on these rocks because it's a really great heat source. So just if you're ever walking by rocks like this or over a bridge, just take a second and look. Maybe you'll see something cool poking its head out from one of these holes. We'll go to another place and see if we can find some other cool reptiles. Alright, so here we have another really great place to find reptiles. If we zoom down on this log, there's a fallen tree in the lake, and we can actually see a really big turtle on the tree. This tree is a really great spot to find turtles because it's right in the sun. It's a great basking place for them. They can lay out there and get warmed up, and then if they see a predator or someone gets too close to them, they can just fall off that tree and be back in the water. We have river cooters, yellow belly sliders, some box turtles are around, but they don't live on the trees in the lake like these turtles do. At Har River, we have some special turtles. They get really big. Let's see, I hear something over here. And oh my gosh, look at this big turtle. This is one of our special Har River turtles, and he is massive. And as you can see, he is doing a great example of what turtles do when they get scared. He's tucking his arms and legs and head up under his shell for protection. And as we can still see his arms and his head, so he can't completely close. We do have a turtle called a box turtle, and that turtle completely closes in its shell. So once it closes up, you can't see any part of it, so it's totally protected. And if we look here, the shells of these turtles are really cool, and all turtles. Turtles have specialized scales called scutes, and we can kind of see right here is a big one, but it's just a special scale. Some people say that you can tell how old a turtle is based on the rings, kind of like we do with trees. But turtles also have another cool feature with their shell, and that is their spine being infused in it. So turtles can't actually leave their shells. There's a lot of cartoons where they come out of them, but in real life they can't because they're connected to it. If you ever find a turtle shell, you can actually see the spine still in there. So this is a really cool feature to see. We'll let this turtle go, we'll leave him alone, and we'll walk back and we'll show you one more cool place that you might could find reptiles, and we'll let our special Har River turtle scurry back to the lake. Okay, so we're at our last place on our tour of Haw River, and as you can see, this is just a big pile of wood. You may have this at your house, or you may know where one is, but this is a great place to find snakes and lizards and other reptiles, and that's because you can see all these spaces where you can hide. Reptiles can get in there and hide. They also have all these little sharp points on them, so if they need to shed, they can scrape on them. Snakes can catch on them and peel their whole skin off at once like they need to. But oftentimes these are in the sun or someplace where they get warm, so the reptiles can be on top during the day and warm up, and then go deeper into the wood pile to cool off. Other mammals can hide in here, so it's a good food source. But this is a really great place to find snakes and reptiles, so if you ever are walking by one, just take a second and look and see what you can find. Just remember, don't pick them up or play with them unless there's an adult who knows exactly what they are, because you don't want to pick up something that you don't know what it is. But thank you so much for going on this tour with us at Haw River. We hope that you learned some cool new things. We hope that you know of some cool spots where you can find reptiles that maybe you didn't think of before. And just keep an eye out. Whenever you're outside, you never know what you might find. But thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode of Digital Camp.